Welcome to CX Today with me, David Dungay. I have with me today founder and principal analyst of ZK Research, Zeus Kerravala. Welcome to the show, Zeus. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Dave. How you been?
I'm good, thank you. Apart from stumbling over your name there in the introduction, I'm very good.
Yeah, well, everybody does that. Yeah, and hopefully I'll get to see you soon, right?
Well, exactly. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, yeah.
So today, Zeus, we're going to be talking about the Gartner's latest CCaaS Magic Quadrant for 2021. Before we get into that, though, do you want to give our audience a bit of an introduction to yourself and ZK Research?
Sure. I'm excited to talk about this because it is hot off the presses. But for those who don't know me, I'm Zeus Kerravala, and as you mentioned, I founded my own research firm, ZK Research. I've been doing that, but I just actually hit the 10-year anniversary at the beginning of August. So I guess that's something.
Congratulations.
My focus area, I'm not like a traditional analyst that has a well-defined coverage area that I live and die with for the rest of my life. I tend to focus on most aspects of communications and networking and security, but I only look at the markets that are emerging or in transition. And the contact center one's a good one because 5-6 years ago, we had a very well-defined set of players. There wasn't a lot of disruption there. And so there really wasn't a lot of interesting research to do. Today, because of the rise of the cloud or artificial intelligence, things like that, the space has gotten a whole lot more interesting. And so now I think warrants more research because it's causing buyers to change their behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, before we get into the nitty gritty, we'll overlay the Magic Quadrant on the screen now, so viewers can have a look at the latest one from Gartner. But in terms of how to read this Magic Quadrant, it's probably worth spending 20-30 seconds on just pointing out, what it all means. So we've got 4 quadrants. Top right, leaders. Bottom right, we've got visionaries. Bottom left, we've got niche players, and top left, we've got the challengers with our vertical axis, ability to execute, and then our horizontal axis is completeness of vision. So that's the quadrant. Zeus, tell us, how important are the placement of these dots on this quadrant?
Yeah, it's funny. It is important, and the quadrants are interesting because, as you mentioned, there's 2 axes that are really important. So that companies can have a strong vision, but for whatever reason, maybe their ability to execute on things, cash flow problems, things like that aren't that high. That's how you become a visionary. So you have strong vision, but weak ability to execute. The challengers are ones that, for whatever reason, they do well on the execution side, but perhaps their vision isn't in alignment. I'm not going to say with the industry, but with Gartner, right? And so I think a lot of customers use this as a shortlisting tool, and so the placement within the quadrant itself isn't as important as the quadrant you're in, right? So I've talked to buyers where they're going to issue an RFP to all the leaders, or all the leaders and all the visionaries and things like that. So making it in the quadrant tends to be more important than the actual where you are in the quadrant itself. Obviously, you would think the further up and to the right you are, the better it is, and that's probably true from a Gartner measurement perspective. But from a practical perspective, from a buyer, it's the quadrant that you're in that matters versus where you're placed in the quadrant.
Excellent. So, look, comparing this year's quadrant to 2019, oh, sorry, not 2019, 2020's quadrant, I should say. Yeah. It doesn't initially appear to be a lot of difference, but tell us, what were the standout highlights for you?
Yeah, there really wasn't a lot of movement in vendors. They were all roughly in the same place they were before. I did notice that the whole quadrant moved down a little bit. I don't know if that was from the pandemic, but everybody has the same relative scoring. Obviously, the 3 big winners are Genesys and NICE with their in-contact product, and Talkdesk, who are all in the leaders categories. And to me, the big winner of this is Talkdesk, because most people know who Genesys and NICE are. They have big install bases. They both acquired their way into the CCaaS space. Talkdesk built theirs from the ground up. They just actually turned 10 as well. I didn't plan that with Tiago a decade ago or anything like that. But those are who I would view as the big winners. I think it is the Amazon Web Services has been creeping up year over year, and I think they're a little further ahead on the vision scale than they were last year. I don't think their ability to execute is about the same. But to me, that the quadrant now is a legitimized AWS as a contact center vendor. I get a lot of questions about are they or are they not in this to stick around for the long haul. And I've talked to Amazon a lot about this. They are here to stay. And but I think they've been in this quadrant now in that spot a couple of years, and I think they're fully legitimized as a vendor.
Yeah, and well, turning our attention to the top left quadrant, the challenges section. The big news from last year was, of course, Five9, who fell out of the leaders quadrant because of the way Gartner produced one global quadrant instead of one for North America and one for Europe. What's your take on that? We all kind of thought maybe Five9 would make it back into the leaders quadrant this year, but they haven't quite made it there.
Yeah, I did talk about AWS before. I thought they would make it back in, but you're right. With Five9, I did think they would make it back into that leaders quadrant. And I don't work for Gartner. I've never really talked to Gartner about this, but I sometimes I struggle to understand their logic, just because they're not in a couple of small regions where they're measuring this. I don't really understand why their ability or their vision would be any less strong than it was prior to that, right? So it's a matter of building out those sites or where they have location, but they put so much focus in to evangelizing the contact center market that to me I'm surprised. If you want to say they're not strong in the build and execute, that's fine, but there's probably been no bigger spokesperson for cloud contact center than their CEO, Rowan Trollope. He's carried, they're the largest publicly traded company in this space. He's on CNBC all the time. He gives a lot of talks on this. And I think Five9 has really carried the flag for this industry for a long time. And so to not see them as a leader, I'm guessing inside Five9 is pretty disappointing. And, when you look at the other players that are in that quadrant with them, 8x8, Vonage, Content Guru, I think 8x8 and Vonage both have good platforms. Content Gurus is okay. But they're certainly not in the same class as Five9 as far as overall market awareness goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about a few of those people in that quadrant. Then you mentioned two of them, 8x8 and Vonage. We're seeing increasingly they're pitching their CCaaS solutions alongside their UCaaS capabilities as well. How important do you think that's going to be long term? And obviously, talking about Five9, and of course Zoom have just acquired them, so we might see a play along the same lines from them down the road as well.
Yeah, well, when Zoom bought Five9, that's the reason they gave, was more and more customers wanted to buy them together. I have yet to really, it's interesting because I've yet to talk to a customer that's given me, well, I've talked to a couple that have had reasons that they want the same stack from a vendor. But from a purchasing standpoint, UC often is the lead for contact center, which is interesting because when you look at the relative value to an organization, the price per seat that you pay, contact center's average revenue price per seat's like $150 or something like that, right? Where UC's on the $20, $30 side, but UC tends to lead the sale in a lot of cases. And I think from an 8x8 and Vonage perspective, they've both gone to market. They're very similar companies. In fact, they both went through a recent CEO change. The former CEO is the one that did all the acquisitions to bring all those capabilities together. 8x8 calls theirs XCaaS, right? Where Vonage is, Vonage Business Cloud is in some ways is very similar, but they use UC as an entry point. Vonage tends to use their API platform a little more than 8x8 does, but they both tend to enter with UC and then sell contact center off of that. And if you look, that's very similar to the way more and more vendors go in the market. Even RingCentral on the UC side sells a lot of contact center where they use UC as a lead. So I do think that's becoming more and more important. I don't believe that's been reflected in this quadrant, though. I think when Gartner looks at it, they look at it through the siloed lens of contact center, which is something I think they may need to address down the road.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question. Are we likely to see a quadrant from Gartner that might encompass both of those technologies as we're seeing them come together?
Yeah, I suspect down the road we might. I don't think it's on the roadmap anytime soon. Gartner takes a long time to change these things. And that's one of the reasons I've been critical of the quadrants in the past. Also, there's no really sense of context either. So if you think about if you were to do a Magic Quadrant for small businesses versus large enterprises, you might have different placements of vendors. But I do think it's and it's a bit of a revenue stream for them too, right? The players that are in the leaders quadrant on the UC quadrant will likely buy the quadrant and do some marketing around it. Same for the CC one. So if they create one, that creates a lower revenue opportunity for them too. So I would think they would have to rethink the entire industry and come up with a different way of scoring it. But I do think, given the trends in the industry and the acquisitions that we've seen, and even the innovation from a few companies that aren't mentioned on here, which hopefully we'll talk about, those two markets are rapidly coming together.
Yeah, well, you've mentioned the elephant in the room. Who's not on this quadrant? Obviously, the leaders in NICE, Genesys, massive installed bases. A few other big vendors out there, such as Avaya, Cisco, all have their own CCaaS offering now. What are they got to do to get on this quadrant?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Again, I don't fully know the entire qualification list, and I do think that next year at this time, we should see both Avaya and Cisco. They both did almost do a relaunch of their CCaaS. Avaya's is relatively new. Cisco has had a CCaaS offering, but they've done a lot of work to bring it into the WebEx stack and things like that. So now it's a full-fledged, in both cases, they're full-fledged CCaaS offerings. In fact, on the most recent earnings call for Avaya, which just happened at time of recording earlier this week, they talked a lot about their cloud growth. Now, in both cases, both Avaya and Cisco have been very steadfast in their belief that this market goes hybrid as it goes up market. And I think that's the conversations I've had with customers. And so I think their approach tends to be a little different because they do deal with, when you look at both those companies, they both deal with Fortune 2000 companies. They have all the big airlines, governments, banks, things like that. So those companies, those types of deployments are a lot more difficult as well because there's a lot more customization and integration work, those services, versus selling to 100-person contact center. But I think the relative newness that they are in this industry has probably kept them out. But I would think that we should see them in here next year.
Yeah, well, I think we're in for an exciting 12 months.
Yeah.
With your crystal ball out, Zeus, if you're looking ahead to next year, you've alluded to a few changes that may or may not happen. What kind of quadrant do you think we're seeing next year? Who are the key players in then? Do you think we'll see a bit of movement this time around in 2022?
Yeah, I think within the leader quadrant, we should see Talkdesk close the gap between Genesys and NICE. I think Talkdesk has an excellent vision for where the industry go. They've got some great people. I don't know if you saw, they just you probably saw this news that they just announced another round of funding at a $10 billion valuation. So that company is innovating very quickly. I think some of the things that are maybe not included in the quadrant, and I'm not privy to all the things that are included in there, but some of the areas where a lot of the born in the cloud players have been innovating is the area of like no code interfaces and low code interfaces, things like that may not be something that gets weighed in, but you have to start thinking about the evolution of the space, right? And the company's AI capabilities and things like that. So that to me would allow them to close that gap. I do think that we should see both Five9 and AWS move back into that leader quadrant. Or AWS has never been there, but Five9 moved back. And I think the merger with Zoom will help that because I believe the regions that have kept Five9 out, Zoom actually has presence in. So if you assume that by next year at this time, there's some cross-selling, although they're not expecting the deal to close until mid next year. So we might not quite have that in place. Yeah. But assuming it is, that might help Five9, move back over the bar. And AWS is one where their placement is very curious to me because Gartner has them as a strong visionary, which I believe they are, but they have them ranked fairly low on ability to execute. They have them in the lower half. And I don't know what AWS would have to do to convince Gartner that their ability to execute is high, because frankly, they could buy the rest of the quadrant if they wanted to. So I think those are a couple of movements we'll see. And I think I think one or both of 8x8 and Vonage will move as well. I think the Rory Reid, who now runs Vonage, and Dave Sipes, who runs 8x8, were brought in to execute on the vision laid down by the former CEOs that actually acquired all the components and brought them together. And I think in both cases now, the components are there and they just have to execute on this. And so if they do their jobs, then you should see their ability to execute grow, and you'll see them move, if at least upwards, if not to the right as well.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you, Zeus. Your comments are always greatly appreciated. It's always lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love the debates on this, and I don't like sometimes I don't like poking at other players' research, but Gartner always leaves themselves open to interpretation of these things, so it's fun to do.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you for watching. You've been watching me, David Dungay, on CX Today. If you like today's discussion, please give us a like and a share on social media. It's greatly appreciated. That's it from me. I'll see you next time.